One of those perfect sort of 50s, 40s movies that BBC or Channel 4 or Channel 5 would have on at about 10 in the morning. And there was something about it that was just so comforting in a weird way. There's something about movies from this era where everything's clearly a set, everything's clearly a prop, but it doesn't take you out of the movie. If anything, it's kind of reassuring, the fact that you're so reminded that you're watching a movie. The acting style is so theatrical, and nowadays the whole big thing is like authenticity in everything. But back then it was the polar opposite.
What? Hey, look at the cars!
Where are the 3 men you left out here?
People would be overacting and delivering their lines in this incredibly staged sort of way, but it just suited it. Like, it suited it perfectly. It's like we've spoken in the past about how sometimes you want to see the movie. I like seeing that that's a set. I like recognising in every scene, even if they're outside or supposed to be in the woods, knowing it's a set. The special effects at times are ropey, like the opening shot where we first see the aliens starting to land in those comets. I remember thinking the actual effect looks pretty good, but we both cracked up watching it when the explosion goes off and it's like into the side of a mountain. This thing's clearly supposed to be like the size of a bus crashing into it, and then you just see a couple of sparks fly up into the air.
Boy, that had me scared. Wonder where it led.
Miles away, I bet you.
Hey, let's go find it, huh?
That probably dropped halfway to Pomona.
Oh, it was nearer than that.
I'm gonna see. Who's coming?
Yeah, I mean, on the pacing of it, what I did like about this film, it's only an hour and a half long. It's a short film compared to films now, 2.5 hours, 3 hours. But a lot of these 50 films that you watch back now, they're so dialogue heavy. Like, scenes will be like cold exchanges back and forwards, whereas this was very snappy.
Punchy.
And it keeps you engaged the whole time.
Sometimes it's not even dialogue heavy, but it's just big exposition dumps.
Yeah.
Where they're like, rather than writing it into the script cleverly, we're just going to have someone say all this stuff the audience needs to know for the next scene to make sense. Whereas this movie is so well written. It does get like the top tier Hollywood treatment. Like it's not a B movie. Even though.
Boy, you could fry eggs on that thing.
I first of all love, like, one of the things I find really fascinating about War of the Worlds is the way they don't even arrive in spaceships. They crash into the Earth. And that harkens back to the novel where they were actually shot out of cannons on the surface of Mars into the Earth's atmosphere. And I love it because this is based on a novel from the 19th century. And obviously it was originally set in London. And H.G Wells, who essentially like invented the sci-fi genre in a space of about 10 years, writing The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, The Shape of Things to Come, another great movie from the 30s. And it's so fascinating seeing how, even though certain things changed, like, you know, there was no force fields in the original novel, there was, and they were tripods rather than the sort of elevated spaceships you see in this. But he basically set all the principles for alien invasion movies, and it hasn't really changed that much.
No.
Like, if you break out the basic blueprint of Independence Day, nearly pretty much 100 years later, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah,
like, he completely set the groundwork, kind of the same way that George A. Romero set the groundwork for all zombie movies to follow, more or less. He really set the groundwork for all alien invasion movies, and novels and books and fiction.
Some of it is exactly the same. Like, you know, you have the nuclear bomb, which is the last resort. They have the force fields, drop it on, does nothing. It's like literally exactly the same. Like, how many years later? The 90s to the 50s?
You're talking about for Independence Day and
for
stuff.
Independence Day, yeah. Like,
yeah,
it follows the same blueprint.
Watch it come down. I see it from my window.
This comet's landed, but it doesn't act like a comet, and all the townspeople go out to see it, and it's this big glowing orb type structure, and it's just sitting there, and it hasn't really even created a big crater, and there just happens to be a bunch of scientists fishing nearby, and I really like the fat policeman that goes up to see him.
Yeah.
and he's like chatting to him, and they're like, "Oh, have some fish," and he just immediately takes someone else's fish, puts it in a sandwich, and he's like eating it and talking with his mouth full to him about like this, that, and the other. So two of the scientists leave, but Dr. Clayton, who's going to be the star of our movie, goes to see what all the fuss is about, and straight away he's a smooth motherfucker in this movie.
Yeah.
He's nearly too casual and laid back at times to be a scientist, because people will be asking him like, "What do you think, Doctor?" And he's kind of just like, maybe it could, maybe it's not, maybe it's Martians, I don't know, blah blah blah. He's got kind of like the Fonz dapper sort of way about him, which sometimes jars a little bit with the fact that he's supposed to be this famous scientist. But he's cool as fuck. Like as soon as he shows up at the site of the asteroid, he meets Sylvia, who's going to be his love interest, and the niece of the local priest. And you find out she doesn't know who he is, but she's talking about how like she's went to study and she did her thesis on this Dr. Clayton, and apparently he's coming down, and she's all excited to meet him, and he's just being all smooth, like tagging her along, like
He knows all about meteors.
You seem to know all about him.
Well, I did a thesis on modern scientists, working for my master's degree.
Did it do you any good?
Why, sure. I got it.
Yeah. It's me.
and you just know they're gonna fuck later on.
He, Dr. Clayton in this, going back to Independence Day point, very much reminds me of Jeff Goldblum's character.
Yeah, I see that.
In Independence Day, like a scientist, but not conventional, because you think like they're all going to be running around in white coats, and we see later on, much like Jeff Goldblum's character, he's just rocking around in a leather jacket. Like, if you saw him on the street, you'd be like, who's this cool cat?
Well, he's kind of like
know what I
Jeff
mean?
Goldblum's character and the president's character rolled into one, serving the
that's a
same
good point.
purpose.
Yeah.
Come on out. We're friends.
That's right. We welcome you. We're friends. Yeah.
So it's not long before things start to go a bit haywire. All the radio signals go out in town. Everyone's watch stops at the same time. Everyone's freaking out, like, what's going on? What, they're having a little barn dance or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
And these three idiots go up to see what's going on with the asteroid. And this weird metal telescope thing's coming out the top. And it gives off this. The sound effects in this movie, I think, are fantastic. They're simple, but I always find them really iconic. Like the sounds of the Martian aircraft have the, that pulsating, repetitive buzz. There's something about it that just, I always found it so memorable from this movie. Like when I think about it, that's one of the first things I remember about this. And also the sounds of the heat rays were really iconic, and they actually created the sound by playing electric guitars backwards.
Oh, I see.
Which is kind of cool because it is a really distinct sound. There's something about it, like it's quite a unique sounding sound.
Yeah, other than, like, I know we laughed at, the spark thing, but other than that, I thought for the time when it was made in the 50s, the special effects were very good. I thought, like, I mean, we say it through, tinted glasses, seeing what we've seen today, like what they've done in advancing special effects. But if you could time travel back then to the 50s, imagine seeing that in the actual cinema on a big screen. They must have been fucking amazed.
You'd be freaking out.
Yeah.
Like, I love the special effects in this. I think the spacecraft especially, there was about 3 of them built, quite large size, moving around on wires. Some HD versions now, you can actually see the wires. We didn't watch it on a HD version, luckily. The better high definition gets, a lot of time the old special effects in older movies that weren't designed for it end up looking a bit ropey. But when you watch it as it was intended, they look fucking amazing. Obviously, the laser effects and stuff look more ropey. The after effects always look more dated in older movies. But the in-camera stuff is fantastic.
Yeah, like 100%. Like when some of the lasers hit and they kind of just evaporate into air. It's kind of just like a transition of where they just kind of, it's like their silhouettes, and then all of a sudden
it's kind of meaningless, and you can see they freeze frame the moment they hit, which makes it look silly as well. But when the odd time where you see a laser blast and then you see real in-camera effects of it, like men on fire
Yeah.
running away, or
That was-
things next to it blowing up or setting on fire just next to the laser blast. That really sells the effect. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
But again, not only do you forgive the effects more in an older movie like this, but it actually is part of the charm.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when we spoke about in the past how old kung fu movies or spaghetti westerns, you want to see the bad dubbing. It's
Yeah,
part of the
exactly.
charm. Like that is, you want to see the bad cuts sometimes, or the terrible acting, because it is actually part of the selling point of the type of movie it is.
How I think special effects now are too overpowering, and I always hark back to Avatar. I just thought it was just too much CGI.
Yeah.
It's not. It just ruined it for me. Like there was no charm to it at all.
Yeah, I
Like,
think I think it's sometimes it's like the Jaws thing where because the shark didn't work, the movie was better.
Yeah.
Because they
Yeah.
had to figure out ways around it, and that becomes an interesting way to present it to the audience. Whereas when you can just be like, yeah, we're just going to animate it, and it's going to do this and do this and do that, and then you can just do it. It ends up nearly, being too obvious, too simple.
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's no interesting way. Like solving the problems is where the uniqueness of a movie comes out in certain ways. Whereas everything's starting to kind of visually look the same in presentation nowadays.
They're just coming down at random.
No. According to information from foreign sources, they're working to some kind of a plan. Now, what it may be isn't clear yet, simply because once they begin to move, no more news comes out of that area.
The three men who go to inspect the Martian
Crash site.
thing that's come out, they all get blasted and vaporized. The doctor shows up with the local policeman, and they see that the three men have been killed. So they're like, what the fuck? So then the army roll into town, and the general. So the army in this that you see, most of them were actual National Guard, and they were performing real maneuvers at the time. So a lot of it was having to be filmed around them
I
doing their
see.
actual maneuvers. And it's quite funny, the general that features prominently in the movie, a lot of, because he was dressed in full uniform, but it was obviously a fake uniform, but he was surrounded by so many real soldiers, he was actually getting saluted a lot on set
Oh,
by
really?
the National Guard members who thought he was a real general,
That's
which
just
is a funny blurring of the lines.
Yeah.
But so they show up and we have our first proper big battle. And what do you think of the scene with the priest going out to try and reason with them?
See, obviously this came first, but it's just every single alien film this happens in. Again, sorry to keep repeating Independence Day, but you get those fucking idiots that go up to the
Yeah.
roof and are like, we come in peace, and like, it just really, it didn't piss me off, but you're just sitting there as a person who's seen it so many times, and you're like, well, that's stupid, they're dead. And obviously they do get obliterated.
What's he think he's doing?
House of the Lord. Forever.
I mean, like,
Well, I appreciate, it's interesting watching the movie because H.G. Wells was famously like a massive, maybe not atheist, but agnostic.
Okay.
Was very anti-religion. There's a real anti-religious theme in the novel. Priests or religious characters are often portrayed as quite cowardly or being of no use, or even getting people inadvertently killed. Religion is shown to be useless, and it's quite a point that's hammered home quite a lot in the novel. This was a American movie being made in the 50s, pre-Cultural Revolution, pre-fucking free love and all that horse shit. This was hardcore, conservative, post-World War II American, and, the movies reflected that, so religion was always going to be portrayed as a good light. But it's interesting that the H.G. Wells family loved the way the movie came out, so obviously couldn't have bothered them too much
yeah.
with how they completely reversed their father's stance on religion.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of interesting, especially the fact that the very climax of the movie takes place in a church.
Yes.
So we have our first big battle, and they get the shit
They
kicked
get
out of them.
shit battered out
They
of
get
them.
absolutely wiped out. I really enjoy the build up. Like, it wraps up the tension, and then the priest gets annihilated, and then that guy says fire, and they all start shooting and banging, and you see the effect of. It's interesting. It's not like a force field around the ship. It's a force
It's
field
like
that
a cup.
it
like
surrounds them and goes down to the ground,
Yeah.
which I thought was quite interesting. I don't know if that was just intentional or it was just the way they could get the effect to look the best they could get.
I mean,
to
my
but...
thoughts on it. It was a bit out of order how they basically let the poor priest like make an idiot of himself with like quoting his Bibles and the Lord is my shepherd, to then get eviscerated by the laser, to then say give it to them. Like they could have at least tried to shoot him before he done all that, before he killed him.
I mean, you say that, but what if it worked?
Oh, good point.
And also, then you're shooting it. What if it worked and then you're already triggering off a fight before they've even shot?
Yeah, good point, good point.
But he was fucking stupid.
Yeah.
The Air Force will take care of these babies now. Dr. Forrester, get out of here! Everybody out of here! Everybody out!
So everything goes tits up. They very quickly realise that their weapons are pretty much useless against them. Everyone scatters in different directions. It did make me laugh actually where the final, not the general, but kind of like the guy below him, he's shouting orders as everyone's running to evacuate. And then somehow the laser beam just magically comes through the wall even though he's under the bunker.
He's in a bunker, I don't know, like 6 foot under the floor, you know, in a nest looking at it. And somehow he just gets evaporated.
But it comes from an angle as if it's in the room underneath
I know. There's a lot. You've got to give it a bit of slack because it's in the 50s, you know what I mean? But there is some points in the film which kind of contributes to its charm in a way that just make no sense and are just funny, like watching it now, and that's one of these.
Like there's also a news reporter guy who's always working on the radio throughout all these sequences, and his old-timey news guy's accent and the way he says stuff, the way they did the news in those days, it just adds so much to it.
When it does burst, we shall be the first men on Earth to get a real look at these invaders from space.
So everyone's making their getaway. Dr. Clayton had actually flown into the area, so he runs and finds his plane, gets into it with Sylvia, and they fly away. And this scene, this is my favourite bit in the whole movie. Like, it's so well done where you've had the army getting wiped out. They get in the plane. They're flying really low because there's loads of army jets in the sky, and they're seeing the army jets fly above them, and you're getting POV shots from the plane as it's going just up over the treetops. And then they come over the treetops, and you see 3 of the Martian aircraft floating around, and they have to turn, and they nearly get hit by the lasers, and they crash into what is clearly a set. But again, I love it because I love seeing the sets. And for me, it was the part of the movie that I was like, that really could have, the pacing and the direction of that could have been a modern movie.
Yeah.
So well done, so memorable. I always remember that sequence as being my favourite part of the whole movie.
Yeah.
And then they crash and they end up in the farmhouse. Yeah, so we're in the farmhouse, and this is another sequence that gets lifted entirely from into the 2005 remake, where they're hiding out in the farmhouse, and you start to see a different sort of telescope, more manoeuvrable, nearly like a very long elephant trunks with its dexterity.
Yeah, it can like go around corners and
that comes into the house and starts looking for him. And old Dr. Clayton hacks it off with an axe. But you made the point of like, it's funny how like bullets and tanks.
Yeah, it's like bullets and tanks and stuff, and the
can't do anything.
Yeah, can't do anything. And the thing is, when I look at this periscope, as they call it, which they compare it to, it looks like it's made of pure metal. So like to cut it off with an axe would be actually impossible. You couldn't cut through metal with an axe, I don't think.
Well, it depends what it's actually made of. Like it has a lot of dexterity, so assuming there's a lot of moving parts flicked together, so
maybe wires and such. So
but my only thinking was, well, the force field clearly was visible at a certain distance away from the craft, so maybe once you're within it, it's proximity.
Yeah, so you said, my thing was like, how did they get through? But maybe because they're so close, they're inside the force field, so that would make sense. It would
be funny if that's how they beat the aliens, if they just got to within did the Mike Tyson thing, get within their jab and just fucking uppercut.
Yeah, let's just go up to it with fucking swords and cut them up. Would be perfect for London with all the knives around there. Yeah. Just go up to it and fucking shank it.
So then we have one of the actual physical aliens come in. Now this is one of the only I think the design in this movie is fantastic for everything. The aircraft, which were apparently made to replicate manta rays, the sound design of the aliens, the fact that they come out and freeze, and all these different things, like the design, the set design, everything is so well done in this movie, except for the aliens, the actual Martians themselves. Physically, we were cracking up when it was on screen.
So funny. It actually reminded me of that scene in E.T. where it is running like.
It's the scene, where it runs away at the end, where it's just
yeah. It was fucking hilarious.
So clearly a puppet.
Yeah.
And I just don't like the eyes. It just didn't work. And they originally wanted to make it a lot more similar to the actual design that was described in the original novel. And the original novel design sounded amazing. You know, they were supposed to be the size of a polar bear with two huge sort of legs like ours, and then 4 arms going up its body, and like 8 tentacles around each eyeball and each mouth, and big teeth. And they actually fed on humans in the original novel, kind of similar how they feed on them in the 2005 remake. And they wanted to repeat that design, they wanted to copy that design, but budget-wise, they just didn't think they could do it. And they also just didn't think special effects and animatronics and puppetry was at the point where it just wasn't going to be feasible, so they ended up going for a much easier, smaller, simpler design.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a shame, but I was also... I laughed at this time, and it's more... you're more likely to laugh at a moment like that when you're with someone else.
Yeah.
So that's fair enough. But when I was a kid, I remember that being extremely memorable scene. And I feel like it's the fact that there's probably about 10 seconds of screen time for the actual physical species
alien,
being on screen, that it just is effective and memorable.
Yeah.
I always wonder though, why the fuck did he get out of the spaceship?
I don't know that either. Maybe he thought the periscope thing had killed him or something. I don't know.
Or maybe he was just checking out to see what was going on. But stay in your big spaceship, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you're only a little fella.
Yeah.
Like, he pretty much nearly kills him straight away. Like, that's the one time you see him walking around, and he comes across as a massive pussy when he's not in his big space boat.
The thing is, Declan...
It was also quite funny how, of all the odds, an alien spaceship literally crashes
into where they're staying.
Into their cab, into their farmhouse they're staying in.
They got a tracker on Clayton and Sylvia. I don't know.
I really like that set design of the farmhouse, like the effect of as it starts breaking apart as the craft lands into it.
Because when the craft lands into it, it doesn't like directly crash. It like hits the floor, and then it looks like sludge, and it just like evaporates the house as like a giant slug. It's just funny, like. But anyway.
So so they go down to a lab, and there's a really awkward, not memorable scene where we were kind of looking at each other, scratching our heads, where they go through setting up the telescope and seeing how the aliens must be able to see, and they all spend about 5 minutes looking into the screen.
Literally.
And I guess that was a really freaky effect back in the day. Do you know what? Now that I remember, I think there was originally this segment, and the rest of the movie was supposed to then be in 3D. And when they put on their goggles, I think it was going to be 3D from that point onwards. So maybe it was like a showcase to the technology for a minute. I don't know. It was the only scene where I really think they should have just cut that. That was just stupid.
If it wasn't that, it was pointless, because it's like, oh, the aliens can see us, but they can see us in green and not normal colour, and it didn't contribute.
Let's see why they were so curious about you, Miss Van Buren.
Yes. They look at one of the scientists who's like some weird French blood expert, looks at the blood under the microscope and looks at the cells, and basically comes out and says, they seem very primitive and weak. Their blood seems so anemic, which of course sets up later on what happens.
So they go for their last big shot, which is the nuclear bomb. Of course, it's the 50s. What else are you going to do? So I really like the effect of the nuclear bomb going off. You can tell the mushroom cloud isn't the actual size of a nuclear bomb mushroom cloud, but it's effective. Like, it really works for me. You know, when it's up and close, the wind machines on everyone, and you get that sense of power, and it works.
know they're setting off a nuclear bomb, and they seem to be in some sort of military base, but for some reason they're all outside, and whoever's inside the actual silo, they haven't even closed the doors, and they're just wearing fucking sunglasses, and like soldiers are actually getting blown away. And then it cuts to someone actually in a bunker who's wearing the whole hazmat suit. It's like, why aren't the people outside wearing a suit? And the whole thing about this nuclear bomb, I had a thought when I was watching this. You know EMPs, like electrical magnetic pulse? I was thinking, clearly they have some sort of magnets because everyone's watch is going awry, and, you know, they're saying, oh, my watch is magnetic and all this. So I was thinking, why didn't they set one of those up to try and disrupt the force field? It turns out that the first EMP was dropped after the 50s in 1962. It's called a starfish bomb, 400 miles into the Pacific Ocean, and the electronic magnetic pulse was so strong that they had electrical interference 900 miles away in Hawaii. That's how fucking strong it was.
Christ.
And it was something 100 times stronger than the bomb they dropped on Hiroshima. So the fucking devastation must have been...
Well, thank God that aliens invaded 9 years earlier.
Yeah.
They would have been fucked.
Yeah.
It would have been a very short movie.
That was just interesting, yeah.
So the nuclear bomb fails. It's all looking hopeless. It doesn't even harm the aliens. Again, reminiscent of Independence Day. It doesn't even harm the aliens. So everyone's freaking out. The army says, we're going to do one last stand, and you guys take your laboratory, get all your equipment, go into the mountains, hide there, set up a lab, and try and figure out something we can do. So you're thinking, okay, this is paint by numbers, I know what's going to happen. Every sci-fi movie from this era, the scientist figures something out that they're going to beat the aliens with, and they do it just in time. So there's these great sequences where the city's been abandoned. First of all, you see everyone like rioting and looting and grabbing stuff and being desperate to leave. But then we see all these scenes where these shots of empty streets as the Dr. Clayton's driving, and the others have already left on the school bus, but he's driving around grabbing the equipment, and he's driving through all these empty streets, or maybe one person's running along or trying to find a bicycle or a car that's still working. And it really sold it for me. I was like, this is eerie, man. This feels like the end of the world. And he ends up getting robbed for his car. And it's a hilarious scene. I love movie fighting from this era. You know the way, like, no one, I feel like in movies from this era, no one fights one person. Like, everyone always, they'll punch one guy next to him, and then that guy, another guy will punch him back.
Yeah, and
then someone will hit him around the back of the head. And like,
someone gets hit by a whiskey bottle. Next thing, some geezer gets just launched through a window. It's like,
and you're thinking, like, is this a group fight, or are you all strangers all fighting each other at the same time?
This was one of the more silly elements of the film. Basically, he gets robbed of his car, but he's trying to get back to it because it's got,
and more importantly, all the equipment. All
his
inside
equipment,
it.
and
So
like,
he can set up this lab in the mountains.
Yeah, research. Like, number one, like, why wasn't he dressed in some sort of scientific...
He was dressed like the Fonz.
Scientific clothing. He's wearing a leather jacket, so no one can tell who he is. And why didn't they give him, like, an army escort?
That is dumb.
It's like, you know, they know it's going to be, like, looting. Like, why isn't this important guy who you've tasked with saving the world have some sort of protection? Like,
the only thing I suppose logically I could give the movie was that maybe the fact that they felt they needed every single soldier on the front line trying to hold back the aliens as long as they could.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I agree with you, that was stupid.
I had another thought on this. If you could have any film scientist to be with you in this situation, who would you choose? And I was thinking, we're in the 1950s here, which Back to the Future is set in.
Oh shit.
Send us Doc Brown.
Yeah.
Because he can fucking time travel. He can easily find a way to defeat these fuckers,
That's
man.
a great
Scott, Marty.
Yeah.
We need to go back to the future.
But would you take Doc Brown from the 50s or Doc Brown once he invents time travel from the 70s? From the 80s?
Doc Brown from the 80s.
Alright.
Because he's got
but
bare
alright,
shit.
but you gotta wait for him to invent time travel to go back in time.
He can feed rubbish to power the car.
Good
he
point.
can beat these fuckers.
He would. He'd fuck him up in his Cadillac.
Yeah. Fuck this
Not
leather...
his Cadillac, what was it again?
DeLorean.
DeLorean.
Fuck this leather jacket guy, man.
So leather jacket. I love this
Dr.
about
Clayton.
the movie where it goes against type of, like I said before, you're expecting him to figure out some convoluted way of beating the aliens.
Yeah.
With some jargon, non-science bullshit. But he doesn't. All his equipment gets stolen, and there's no hope. All hope is gone.
Could have stopped them. The mob stole all the trucks, smashed everything up. Pull out! They cut their own throats! Nuts, come on, jump in!
The Martians crafts are already entering the city, which means the army's already been wiped out.
Yeah.
And he just says, all right, I'll just look for Sylvia. Like, because he knows there's no hope now. And the next 10 minutes of the movie is him searching. He goes from church to church, seeing all these desperate people, like, huddled together like ants waiting to get exterminated by a fucking kid lifting up a rock. And we see him go from church to church, and he finally finds it. And they embrace and whatever, and outside you hear the craft, that pulsating, rhythmic, same iconic
and you see,
sound.
Like, the red lights, and you're like,
and you see them approach, and they're blasting every building in sight. Really good effects, by the way, of the city. Like, they obviously used miniatures for the city, wide shots of the city. I love miniatures in movies, even the old movies where it looks a bit ropey and you know it's a miniature.
Yeah.
But it's all like there's no hope, and then you see the craft start crashing. Interestingly, they had it intentionally crash into telephone lines for the reason that they could hide the wires, because obviously as it crashed, wires would sort of get tangled and lose their slack and be more visible. But anyway, so all the crafts start crashing, and like you said before about the hemoglobin and the blood looking weak and anemic and sickly, it was because, as the narrator explains at the end, so we've evolved being used to all the different bacteria on Earth, but these Martians had never experienced it before, so within a few days their immune systems broke down and they all died. And you see that iconic last shot of the aircraft door opening and the little creepy alien three-fingered hand crawling out and dying.
Mate, it'd be so easy now. Just pick up, if it happened, just pick up the phone. Wuhan, release strain 10 of COVID.
That's true.
They all explode.
Maybe that's why it got released.
But I was trying to be clever when they were going through the town. I'd be like, I just stayed at it. Cause like,
your big strategy.
They're going to like the population, so
you were thinking they'd go to the mountains.
Yeah. That's what I thought, and I'm like, they're not going to just destroy it, and they just blow everything.
2 seconds later, it was like that building you said you'd hide in.
But I also made another good point. Like, why don't they? They always seem to be flying in that formation as the general put on the board, and they never seem to go back to where they're going. So just like cut round, and they're not going to go backwards.
Another really good point.
Yeah. So. Fucking off soldiers.
You would have survived.
Hurry up! Jump in! There was a girl with her. If I could find her. Come on, jump in, will ya? Kind of lost. You look kind of lost yourself.
Yeah, Dr. Clayton, the little suave motherfucker, in his leather jacket scientist, biker scientist. He can fly planes, he can fish, he can do whatever. He only knows this Sylvia girl for 1 week. It's such a classic 50s thing where you meet a girl and then instantly you're like lovers. It's like, right.
They even had the moment where she's hysterical and he's got like, get a hold of yourself.
That's when I thought they were going to kiss.
It's usually they slap them and they have a kiss.
But it's funny because like we mentioned it earlier. He finds Silver in the second church. French scientists in general are fucked with like ash all unkempt, but Sylvia's looking as stunning as ever. Like
she is gorgeous. Oh my god! The moment she shows up, you're just like, fuck yeah. Something about that 50s look.
Something about the hair and
the way they'd have the bras would be all pointy. And shit. Like, oh my goodness.
He finds her, and then I guess later on when the aliens die of COVID or flu or whatever they're fucking dying of, they go off into the sunset, I guess.
Once they had breathed our air, germs which no longer affect us began to kill them. The end came swiftly. All over the world, their machines began to stop and fall.
Yeah. What's your most memorable moments?
when the alien comes out and just runs away.
Yeah.
It just sticks in my head.
It reminds me of what those like flapping inflatable things they have.
Those
they have
massive arms.
at
Outside
lots,
car
like
washes.
second-hand car
Yeah,
places.
it's like that, yeah. That was my memorable moment. I guess my most memorable character is actually that stupid, fat, fish-eyed policeman.
I
He's
loved
like
him
a
as well.
bumbling idiot. Like,
Or he's just like talking with his mouth or spitting crumbs into someone's face.
And also, like, it's the 50s, but how, like, they stereotype the Mexican guys so much. He's like, we can make tortillas out of this. I'm like, fuck.
I don't think he said that, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Racist.
I just love the airplane sequence is always my favourite sequence. There's just something about it. It's just so polished and well done, and it felt like it wouldn't have been out of place in a modern movie for its pacing and everything. It's just perfect. Iconic moments, that the meeting the actual alien where it comes in flapping its arms, the final sequence in the church, that moment where he's driving through the abandoned cities and then gets his car stolen and he's just walking looking for Sylvie, and you just, that feeling of hopelessness and you know, there is no genius way the scientist is going to save the day. It's just everyone's scared and there's no hope. I love those sort of moments in movies, and this one, it established that tone so well and really made you feel like there was just nothing you could do against these unstoppable alien beings that seemingly were so much more advanced than we were.
And other than that, I just got to give a shout out to the sets in general. I you know, as you said earlier, it's clearly like the backdrop's clearly like a painting or a screen. But I just thought for the time, like, it looks really good, like, just in general.
For the time, and for now, even for that nostalgic sort of aesthetic, it's just, I just love it. I just love the look of sets and backdrops and these ropey special effects and the over-the-top theatrical acting. It all just comes together. It's like it just reminds me of like Saturday mornings when I was a kid and these sort of movies would be on. So, yeah, it's an easy recommendation for War of the Worlds.
This is the Filming McFilm Film Show.